morning. Breakfast. Omelet. Ham, mushroom, and onion omelet. It's quite nice, actually. You should join me. Yeah. Wow. I had the misfortune of entering a discussion with an incel who asked me a strange question. He said, "Are you ethnic?" To which I could only reply, everybody is ethnic, because everybody comes from a cultural background, and that's what ethnic means, coming from a cultural background. But this, strictly speaking, is an error, because in the English-speaking world, we are so heavily influenced by Hollywood that in a very real sense, the English-speaking world has become a monoculture. So that we no longer have the regional variations. Instead, our culture is determined by what movies were playing in theaters when we were growing up. Yeah. Our culture is not shaped by the weather and the climate and the landscape. It is shaped by Hollywood. And this has led to a very, very unhealthy society in which humanity has become a sort of generic lumpen proletariat with no regional variations. At least this is true for the English-speaking world. And throughout the rest of the Western world, in major cities, everything has become very much the same Hollywood-influenced culture, where your ethnicity is determined not by your environment, but by the movies you watched growing up. Because that is what shapes your culture, is the movies that Hollywood puts out, the movies that you consume, the movies that influence you and shape who you are. In a world where suburbia has isolated us from the environment and from our food supply and from our climate, we are shaped by the movies we watch, by the TV shows that we watch. And increasingly, all of this is very tightly controlled by corporate interests. Corporate interests that care nothing for long-term consequences, but only for short-term profits. And those corporate interests, well, yeah, they are dictating to Hollywood what Hollywood dictates to us, with dire consequences. Now, there are, of course, regional variations in rural parts of Europe and in rural Asia, where, again, Hollywood is a very powerful force in the cities, but not in the countryside. But in North America, England, Australia, and New Zealand, Hollywood decides the culture. And not just in the big cities, but all the way back into the hinterland. And Hollywood sells us a different kind of diversity. Diversity through skin tone, through complexion. Hollywood diversity places everybody with pale skin, yellow hair, and blue eyes as a single ethnicity. and then everybody with dark skin and curly hair as another ethnicity, so that a Zulu and an Australian Aborigine are suddenly interchangeable with one another, despite being completely unrelated and living in completely separate environments with completely different cultural influences. And of course, this has dire consequences. If we cannot differentiate, then we cannot judge accurately and reasonably. If we cannot differentiate between somebody from Edinburgh and somebody from Heidelberg, how are we supposed to differentiate who we are? And yet our culture, dictated to us from Hollywood, does just that. It makes us all interchangeable. It removes our individuality. And it makes individuality a luxury item, a commodity that only the wealthy can afford. So that in the end, capitalism makes us all into a generic lumpen proletariat. Incapable of distinguishing ourselves from each other. Everybody is supposed to be ethnic because everybody is supposed to come from a cultural background. But the English-speaking world has an artificially generated culture fed to us by Hollywood, which deprives us not only of our regional differences, but of our individuality. And thus deprives us of our humanity. It's a rather scary thought when you think about it. Hollywood is destroying us to make money. And we are paying for our own destruction, gleefully enjoying it and washing it down with really bad nachos in really bad cheese sauce, washed down with a super big gulp drink as we stare rapturously at the silver screen. And have our individuality, both as individual people and as individual cultures, sucked out of us through our eyeballs. This is not something to celebrate, ladies and gentlemen. This is something to mourn. Hollywood is destroying us for profit, and we're helping them. And no, it's not socialism, it's capitalism. It's raw, naked capitalism. The greed. When I was growing up, we were told that communism would do this to us. But now, with the Soviet Union gone, capitalism is doing it to us instead. And we're still trying to blame communism for it. Yeah. The more power we give to the capitalists in order for them to save us from this erosion of ourselves, the more they erode ourselves. It's rather disturbing when you think about it. It's rather disturbing. Have a nice day.